The first gunshot cracked the night like a hammer against glass. People on the sidewalk flinched, unsure whether it was a firework or a car backfiring, but the two officers standing near the patrol cruiser knew instantly. They felt it in their bones. In the way the sound didn't fade, only echoed. Rain had just started to fall, thin and cold, blurring the streetlights into trembling halos. Officer Daniel Reyes had been talking about his daughter's school play. Officer Marcus Hale was half listening, smiling, pretending not to notice the ache in his knee from an old training injury. Then the man stepped out of the shadow. He was close. Too close. No warning. No shout. No time to reach for a weapon. The muzzle flashed. Reyes felt the heat before the pain. Hale saw his partner stagger, eyes wide with disbelief, as if the world had suddenly betrayed him. The second shot followed instantly, point-blank, brutal, deliberate. Hale moved on instinct. He lunged sideways, crashing into the cruiser door, his hand already on his holster. The gunman didn't run. He didn't scream. He simply turned, calm and expressionless, like someone switching channels on a television. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, Hale saw something unsettling in the man's face. Not rage, not panic, but certainty. As if he had already accepted whatever would happen next. Hale fired. The shot missed by inches, shattering a shop window behind the gunman. Glass exploded onto the pavement. People finally began to scream. Footsteps pounded in every direction. Somewhere, a car horn blared continuously, forgotten by its driver. The gunman fired again. Hale felt the impact slam into his shoulder, spinning him backward. He hit the ground hard, the taste of blood filling his mouth. The world tilted, lights smearing into long, dizzy streaks. Reyes was on his knees now, trying to lift himself, one hand pressed against his chest, blood slipping between his fingers. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Hale dragged himself toward him, ignoring the burning in his shoulder. "Stay with me," he whispered, though he wasn't sure Reyes could hear him anymore. The gunman stepped closer. Rain dripped from the brim of his hood. His grip on the weapon was steady, almost gentle. He raised it again, this time aiming directly at Hale's face. Hale stared down the barrel, every thought in his mind colliding at once. His mother's voice, his unfinished report, the promise he'd made to call his brother, the smell of coffee in the station that morning. A siren wailed in the distance. The gunman hesitated. It was only a second, but it was enough. Hale twisted, firing upward from the ground. The bullet tore through the man's sleeve, drawing a sharp line of red across his arm. The gunman cursed under his breath and stepped back, retreating into the rain and shadows, disappearing between two buildings as backup sirens grew louder. Hale crawled to Reyes, gripping his uniform, trying to keep him conscious. "Don't you dare close your eyes," he said, his voice shaking. "You hear me? You stay right here with me." Reyes blinked slowly, struggling to focus, his lips moving as if trying to form a word that refused to come out. The rain kept falling. The sirens kept screaming closer. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the streetlights, the gunman was still moving, still breathing, still carrying the same calm certainty as he vanished into the city, leaving behind two broken bodies, a shattered window, and a question that would haunt everyone who arrived on that scene in the next few moments. Hale pressed harder against Reyes's wound, feeling the warm, slippery blood soaking into his gloves. The sirens were closer now, echoing off the buildings, but time still felt frozen, stretched thin and fragile, like it might snap at any second. "Stay with me, Danny," Hale whispered again, forcing his voice to sound firm. "You're not done talking about that stupid school play yet." Reyes's eyes fluttered. A weak breath escaped his lips. His chest rose, then faltered. Hale adjusted his grip, trying to remember every bit of training, every lecture, every warning he had ever been given. Pressure. Don't panic. Keep him conscious. But fear crept in anyway. Around them, people hovered at a distance, faces pale, phones raised, some crying, some frozen in shock. A woman knelt a few meters away, hands over her mouth, whispering prayers in a language Hale didn't recognize. A man shouted that help was coming, as if saying it louder could make it arrive faster. Hale looked up the street, searching the darkness where the gunman had disappeared. The alley was empty, just a narrow throat of shadow between brick walls. No footsteps. No movement. Just rain sliding down metal fire escapes. He hated how quiet it suddenly felt. The first patrol car skidded to a stop, tires screeching. 2 officers jumped out, weapons raised, eyes scanning every rooftop and doorway. An ambulance followed seconds later, its red lights painting the street in violent pulses. Paramedics rushed toward them, voices sharp and fast, hands already moving. They eased Hale away from Reyes, replacing his grip with practiced efficiency. Hale protested weakly, then let go, his strength finally slipping. As they worked on Reyes, another medic knelt beside Hale, examining his shoulder. Hale barely noticed. His eyes stayed locked on his partner. On the way, Reyes's face had gone strangely calm, as if he were already somewhere else. "Talk to me, Daniel," one of the medics urged. "Can you hear me?" Reyes's lips moved. This time, a sound came out. It was barely a whisper, barely a word, but Hale heard it. "Did he get away?" Hale swallowed. "Not yet," he said, though he didn't know if that was true. "We'll find him." Reyes's mouth curved into the faintest smile, then his eyes drifted shut again. They lifted him onto a stretcher, sliding him into the ambulance. Hale tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The medic caught him, guiding him toward the second ambulance. Inside, the world shrank to the hum of machines, the smell of antiseptic, the blur of red lights through the back windows. Hale's shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, but he barely felt it. His mind was still on the alley, on the man's face, on that moment of hesitation. Why had he hesitated? At the hospital, everything became motion and noise. Doctors, nurses, corridors, doors swinging open and closed. Hale lost sight of Reyes for a moment, then for longer, then completely. Someone asked him questions. He answered without really hearing himself. Hours later, he sat alone in a plastic chair, his arm in a sling, staring at the floor. The rain had stopped outside, but he could still hear it in his head. A detective finally approached him, a tall woman with tired eyes and a notebook pressed against her chest. She introduced herself, spoke gently, and began asking about the shooter. Hale described him as best he could. The hood, the calm, the certainty. The way he hadn't looked afraid. "Did he say anything?" she asked. Hale shook his head.
"No."
"That's what scared me the most." She nodded slowly, writing it down. When she left, Hale was alone again. He didn't know how much time passed before a doctor came toward him. Hale recognized the look on his face instantly. Not hopeless. Not reassuring. Somewhere painfully in between. The doctor spoke, and the words reached Hale like echoes from underwater. Critical condition.
Surgery.
Internal bleeding. They were doing everything they could. Hale nodded because nodding was easier than speaking. Later, he stood in the hallway outside the operating room, staring through the glass at shapes moving behind it. His reflection stared back at him, pale and unfamiliar. He looked older than he had that morning. In his mind, the scene replayed again and again. The first flash, Reyes stumbling. The second shot, the gunman's eyes. He wondered what would have happened if he had fired sooner, if he had moved faster, if he had noticed something in the shadows before the man stepped out. The guilt wrapped around him quietly, without asking permission. Far across the city, in a narrow apartment above a closed laundromat, the gunman washed his hands in a cracked sink. The water ran red, then clear. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, at the small cut on his arm, at the blood that wasn't his. He felt no triumph, only a strange, heavy awareness that something had shifted. He removed the hood and set the weapon on the table, disassembling it with careful, almost respectful movements. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of how close it had come to losing more than it already had. Back in the hospital, Hale finally sank into another chair, his head in his hands. A nurse placed a cup of coffee beside him. He didn't touch it. He thought about Reyes's daughter. About the school play. About the way Reyes had laughed when he talked about it. The doors to the operating room remained closed. Hale lifted his head when he heard footsteps, expecting the doctor, the detective, or another officer. Instead, he saw a man in a dark suit standing at the end of the corridor, watching him quietly, as if he had been there for a while. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Hale felt the same chill he had felt in the rain, the same sense that the night was not finished with them yet, that the story unfolding around those gunshots was far larger, far deeper, and far more dangerous than he had begun to understand. The man in the dark suit didn't move closer at first. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, posture relaxed in a way that felt completely out of place in a hospital corridor where lives were being held together by thread and hope. Hale studied him carefully. No badge visible. No uniform. Not a doctor. Not a nurse. His eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that didn't miss small details. Finally, the man stepped forward. "Officer Hale," he said softly, as if raising his voice might break something invisible. "I'm Agent Corvin. Internal Affairs and Special Crimes." Hale straightened despite the pain in his shoulder. "You're fast." Corvin gave a thin smile. "So, was your shooter?" They stood in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of hospital equipment filling the space between them. Corvin's gaze drifted to the closed operating room doors. "How is your partner?" he asked. "Still fighting," Hale replied. "Just like he always does." Corvin nodded, as if filing that away. "I need you to tell me everything again.
Slowly.
From the moment you stepped onto that street." Hale exhaled, then began. He described the rain, the lights, the shadows. He described the first shot, the second, the way the gunman didn't run. He described the hesitation. Corvin listened without interrupting, his expression never changing. When Hale finished, Corvin spoke quietly. "This wasn't random." Hale looked up. "You already know who he is." "Not his name," Corvin said, "but his pattern." He explained that over the past year, there had been similar incidents in 3 different cities. Always late at night. Always close range. Always with a strange, almost deliberate calm. And every time, the shooter vanished without a trace. "They call him the Ghost," Corvin said. "Not because he can't be seen, but because he leaves nothing behind that can hold him." Hale clenched his jaw. "He left Reyes." Corvin's eyes softened slightly.
Yes.
"And that changes things." A nurse appeared at the door of the operating room, glanced at Hale, then disappeared again without speaking. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words. Corvin continued. "The Ghost usually doesn't hesitate. That pause you described? That's new." Hale thought of the sirens. The flicker of doubt in the man's eyes. Maybe he realized he wasn't untouchable. Or maybe, Corvin said, he recognized something in you. Hale looked at him sharply. "Like what?" Corvin didn't answer directly. "Do you believe people choose who they become, officer?" Hale frowned. "I believe people choose what they do." Corvin smiled faintly. "Then this man made a choice tonight. And he didn't finish it." Across the city, the Ghost sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. He could still feel the resistance of the trigger beneath his finger, the moment when he should have pulled it again, and didn't. He told himself it was because of the sirens. But he knew that wasn't the whole truth. He saw Hale's face every time he closed his eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Something else. Something stubborn and unyielding. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Back at the hospital, hours slipped by like water through cracked hands. Officers came and went. Reports were taken. Calls were made. But no one brought the one answer Hale wanted. When the doctor finally returned, his expression was still balanced between hope and warning. "He's alive," he said. "But the next few hours are critical." Hale closed his eyes in relief that felt too fragile to trust. "Can I see him?" Briefly. Reyes lay pale beneath the lights, surrounded by machines that hummed softly, steadily. His chest rose and fell, slow but certain. Hale stood beside him, careful not to touch anything he shouldn't. "You're still here," Hale whispered. You don't get to leave yet. You still owe me coffee. Reyes didn't move, but his breathing remained steady. Hale turned to leave, then paused, looking back once more as if trying to memorize the sight. Outside the room, Corvin was waiting again. He's not done with you, Corvin said. Hale met his gaze. Neither am I. Corvin nodded approvingly. Good. Because this isn't just about one shooter anymore. The ghost is part of something larger. A network that believes fear is the fastest way to change a city. Hale felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Then we change them first. Corvin handed him a thin file. I was hoping you'd say that. Inside were photographs, dates, locations, and fragments of lives that had crossed paths with the ghost and never been the same again. Hale flipped through them slowly, feeling the weight of each page. He's not a monster, Corvin said quietly. He's a man who decided to stop being one thing and start being something worse. Hale closed the file. Then he can decide to stop again. Corvin studied him for a moment, then gave a rare, genuine smile. That's why I wanted you. The hospital lights flickered slightly as a storm began again outside, rain tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the city, the ghost stood near a bus stop, watching people pass, blending into their movement, their noise, their lives. He felt the pull of unfinished business. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure which direction it would take him. In the hallway, Hale adjusted the sling on his shoulder, straightened his back, and stepped forward with the file under his arm, unaware that every step he took was quietly pulling him closer to the man who had already changed his life, closer to a truth that would soon force both hunter and hunted to confront what they had become, and what they were still capable of becoming, as the distance between them slowly, dangerously, began to close. The distance between Hale and the ghost did not close with gunfire or sirens. It closed with understanding. Weeks passed. Reyes survived, though he would never return to the streets the same way again. The bullet had spared his heart, but not his certainty. When he finally opened his eyes fully, the first face he saw was Hale's, and the first thing he said was not about pain or fear, but about the alley. He didn't want to finish it, Reyes whispered. Hale had no answer then. He only squeezed his partner's hand and promised that whatever story had started in the rain would not end in silence. The investigation peeled back layers that had been hidden beneath years of shadows. The ghost was not born in violence. He was shaped by it. A former officer, once decorated, once trusted, who had watched corruption erase everything he believed in. He had tried to fight it the right way. When that failed, he chose the wrong one. Hale read every file. Every line felt heavier than the last. The ghost was not just a criminal anymore. He was a warning. When they finally found him, it was not in an alley or behind a weapon. It was in an abandoned train station at dawn, where dust floated in pale light like drifting memories. He stood there alone, unarmed, as if he had already decided how the moment would end. Hale approached slowly, his hand not on his gun, but open at his side. You hesitated, Hale said quietly. That night. You didn't have to. The ghost didn't turn. I wanted to, he replied. But I saw what I used to be in your eyes. Silence filled the space between them, thick and fragile. You didn't see a hero, Hale said. You saw someone still trying. The ghost finally faced him. His eyes were tired, not angry. Broken, not cruel. Trying doesn't fix what's already been destroyed. No, Hale answered. But it stops you from destroying yourself. For a long moment, neither moved. The world outside the station continued, unaware that a decision was being made that would never make headlines the way blood did. The ghost lowered his head. I thought fear would make people listen, he said. All it did was make me forget who I was. Hale stepped closer, slowly, carefully. Then remember. The ghost closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something inside him had shifted. He raised his empty hands. It ended without another shot. When the story reached the public, it wasn't told the way it truly happened. It never is. The headlines spoke of arrests, of justice, of closure. They didn't speak of the look in a man's eyes when he realized he could still choose differently. They didn't speak of the officer, who refused to let anger decide the ending. Reyes watched the news from his hospital bed, a faint smile on his face. "You did it," he told Hale. Hale shook his head. "We did." Months later, the rain returned to the city, gentle this time, washing streets that no longer remembered the blood. Hale stood on the same sidewalk where everything had begun. He could still see it if he closed his eyes, the flash, the fall, the fear. But now he could also see something else. Hope. Not loud, not perfect, but alive. Reyes joined him, leaning slightly on a cane, stubborn as ever. "You know," he said, "my daughter finally did that school play." Hale smiled. "Was she good?" "She was incredible." They stood together in silence, not haunted anymore, but aware. Aware that every ending carries the weight of what came before it, and every choice carries the power to change what comes next. Somewhere far away, the ghost sat in a quiet room, no longer a shadow, no longer a name whispered in fear. He was just a man learning how to live with what he had done and what he had chosen to stop doing. And for the first time in years, he was not running. The city kept breathing. Lights turned on in windows. Children laughed in passing cars. Sirens wailed somewhere, but they no longer felt like echoes of that night. They felt like reminders that life was still moving, still fragile, still worth protecting. Hale looked up at the sky, rain touching his face like a soft promise. He thought of how close everything had come to ending differently, how close he had come to losing his partner, his faith, himself. And he realized something simple and powerful. The gunman had opened fire point blank on 2 cops. But he had not destroyed them. He had not destroyed the city. He had not destroyed the future. Because in the end, the story was never about the bullets. It was about what survived them. And as Hale and Reyes walked away from the street where fear once ruled, their footsteps fading into the sound of rain and distant traffic, the city carried their story forward, not as a tale of violence, but as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human heart still holds the power to choose a different ending.